Welcome everyone to Science Society today and in the future for future listeners. And of course, a special welcome to you, Francesca. And before we start, let me try to give the audience a brief introduction because there's so much interesting things to mention about you and your work that it's kind of hard to condense it down, but I'll try the best. So Professor Francesca Iacopi, she's a professor of nanoelectronics and nanophotonics and a distinguished lecturer at the School of Electrical and Data Engineering uh, and the Faculty of Engineering and IT at the University of Technology, Sydney. And she is the group leader of the Integrated Nanosystems Labs. I shared the website, and she's the chief investigator at the ARC Center of Excellence in Transformative Matter Optical System, and also associate investigator at the ARC Center of Excellence in Future Low Energy Electronic Technology. And she and her lab do really interesting research in enabling nano devices and integrated systems with ultra low energy consumption, with I think it's really important, minimizing all the energy use and also minimizing thermal and mechanical and electrical losses in those systems. And her lab was awarded. No, that's my watch spying on me. Sorry about that. I'm not sure I understand. Oh my God, shut up. And they were the recipient of Global Innovation Award at the World's Tech Connect Summit in Washington. And I could say, as I said, many more, mention many more things, but she did her master's in physics at the Sapienza University of Rome and her PhD at the University of Leuven in Belgium. And welcome, and thank you so much. It's such an honor having you here. And if you could tell us a little bit about how you became a scientist, like how did you discover this passion and this great ability of doing this wonderful research? Was it a childhood dream or something that came later?
First of all, Katerina, thanks for having me. I think it would have been nicer, of course, if I could be in the clubhouse and see the people. But we'll do like that at the moment. I'm sure we'll still have a nice discussion. So how did I become a scientist? It wasn't a straightforward line, I don't think. I think I changed my mind quite a few times. All through high school, I was very interested in astrophysics, really, from a very young age. But I thought I hated mathematics, which is kind of interesting because it's the base of what I do these days. You see, just given I use this example a lot when I teach because particularly with the girls, and they sometimes you might have this, because you don't have the same engineering mind sometimes as boys, you might think, oh, you're maybe not suitable for that, but actually no, that's not necessarily true. It's quite a lot of people can bring in important contributions into STEM. In the end, I was inspired by a teacher at high school. That's how I started really loving mathematics, loving physics, and I got into physics. So I got into physics, and I was working in CERN, in particle physics, something really different from what I'm doing these days. And then little by little, I developed an interest towards microelectronics, because microelectronics was also a very important part of what we were doing in CERN for the detectors. And so microelectronics miniaturization, the materials and processes that enable miniaturization. So all of the things that go around how to make systems that are very powerful, that can do so many different things, like these days a smartphone. How can we make that even more powerful, even more accessible for everybody? And how to make some potentially, of course, how can we make some of the medical devices also portable and accessible to everyone? And what can materials do for that? So this is basically a little bit how my my path towards what I'm doing these days has developed. But it wasn't just enlightening from one day to another. It's been just a very long path.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that that insight, and I'm so glad you stick to it. No matter what the typical image was of, who should be an engineer and who has the right mindset, because now you did this wonderful and amazing work, and we get to talk here, and you get to represent women in such a wonderful way. So yeah, it's a wonderful positive story that we got to hear today. And then if you could bring us to the research we are talking about today. I know you do many other projects that are also really, really interesting, but yeah, if you could bring us to this project and how it came about, how you came maybe to work on this and become interested in it, and how was it easy to get funding for it, and to find, good team members and collaborators, whatever peek behind the curtain you have. Thank you.
Sure. So this is a good story, because this also took a while before developing. And the way it started, it was a bit out of serendipity, to be honest. When I came to my university in Sydney, one of the first meetings we had was a meeting where my good collaborator these days, so Professor C.T. Lin, was also attending. And normally I wouldn't get to talk to him, in normal circumstances, because I'm an electronic engineer. He's a computer scientist. We belong to different schools, different type of conferences. So we would never come across. But out of serendipity, we did come across. And I think after a talk that I gave, CT approached me and he started talking to me about his work. He spent his whole career, he's a senior professor, and he spent his whole career about understanding what he calls these brain waves. So these collective neuron oscillations from the brain. And but of course, from the point of view of really interpreting them and from the algorithm point of view. So he's developed a lot of algorithms and refined algorithms based on his fuzzy logic approach to get more and more accurate systems for the interpretation of brainwaves. And of course, he knows how to use it. And he talked to me about the capability of using brainwaves and EEG to actually do brain-machine interfaces. And at the time, honestly, I was very, very intrigued, because I thought it was still in the area of sci-fi. I didn't and that happens to me these days when I talk about my work. That people still ask me, like, is that really real? Is that true? And we can't really comprehend how. So yeah, I was very intrigued by his work, and I said, yeah, absolutely. If we have the chance, I'd like to try and use our material platform to use it for sensors. And he told me that one of the bottlenecks for them, it was the sensors, the fact that dry sensors are usually not very, very accurate. And I thought, well, we're working on graphene. Graphene has a lot of really interesting properties. It's very biocompatible. There could be some very conductive, and there could be something there. So I really I was very intrigued by what he was doing. But that was 7 years ago. Now that we really started working on that seriously, of course, on a very thought experiment basis, we did that early on. But that when we started seriously working on that, it was only basically when we started having funding for it, which took quite a while. So in Australia, we had this interesting call for, this was a defense. Basically, the project is for defense. And the defense force was very interested to develop these brain-machine interfaces based on wearables for their own operational needs. And the case study was indeed this robotic dog platform that we use in the second paper that I shared. Yeah, so basically from the time we put in the application to the time that we actually got it awarded, I think it was more than 2 years. It was a long process, so it was really, but yeah, we persevered. And so the team was already there. So his team and my team, we were already formed, but we never worked together. So what was really great in this project was really coming together from these completely different perspectives. So I work with very small things, very small, one component, one transistor, one, very, very, very pointed and very, very small systems. And he and his team work from a full system perspective and from algorithm, computer science. So there was a long way to bridge, but we've been able to do it, and it's been great to see that also for the people in my team and his team to kind of come closer and closer together as we progressed. It's been really, really good. And of course, I got extremely interested in neurosciences. And although I never had a neuroscience course in my past, I studied so many different things, but never that type of area. I just got the COVID period to catch up with that. So I used it to learn as much as possible with formal and informal ways. And that was particularly important for me to do that, and also use that knowledge and in basically to further this merging of our two teams from computer science to materials and devices embedded in the application of neuroscience. So it's been extremely rewarding. And it took a long time. It took a lot of effort, but I say it was worth it. And we're also happy that we just got another funding for another 3 years. So we'll be starting that quite soon, mid-year probably. And that's really another challenge because we need to basically scale up, understand some of the problems a little bit more into details, but also scale up the production of these sensors. And that would be a whole other level of challenges, of course. And but we're looking forward to that.
Wow, that is a really interesting path, and I'm so glad you met at the conference and got to speak, and because I think it will be for sure interesting for defense and save a lot of lives there, that people don't have to directly maybe go into combat, but also I think for people with paralysis and so on, I think this will be a really groundbreaking technology to use. So, and I'm glad to hear you got more years of funding and you're thinking about scaling it up. So if you would like now to go into your research, we are really curious to learn more, and then we'll ask you a few questions about it. Thank you.
Sure. So I was thinking to start with, so the first paper is basically the basic one where we started. So it's appeared in the Journal of Neural Engineering 2021. And so this is historically our first in this area. We explain, if you go, for example, to figure number 3, we explain how we develop the sensor. And in fact, so again, remembering that this is a wearable sensor, we're not using implanted systems at all. So we're just using EEG principles. And of course, there's a level of complementarity. There's a lot of people, a lot of colleagues of mine that are using instead, they're developing implanted sensors. And I'd say, I mean, it's not the one is better than the other. They just do different things. From a point of view, so one is more precise, it's inside the skull, so it can really act on a few neurons rather than millions like we do outside. Principally, well, my collaborator was really an expert of EEG signals, so that's naturally how the way we went. But to be honest with you, also the other thing is that we were looking more at also the large scale, consumer and getting this out as much as possible in the wide public. And of course, the implanted sensor wouldn't be that covers a completely different space. It would be more for people that are impaired, that really need they're sick, and so they would trade off having an implant and surgery for improving their quality of life. Now, so these are basically dry sensors for EEG. The EEG sensors in the hospital, in fact, already work very well, and they are still the kind of the gold standard for us. So, in fact, what we're doing, we are trying to make that system portable by developing dry sensors that are, as good potentially, so aspirationally can get as good as those that are used in a clinical setting. So the silver chloride wet sensors are working well, but they work with gels. And working with gels means that the gels, after a while, they start drying. They dry up. And because of that, of course, we start losing contact. The resistive contact with the skin degrades, and it becomes, almost impossible to read out. So dry sensors, on the other hand, as a general rule, they don't behave, they are not as good as those sensors, but can be portable. But of course, in order to achieve a decent accuracy, we would like to have sensors that are much, much better. They can make a leap compared to the current dry sensors. And this is where the space that we're basically filling in with this graphene on silicon sensors. So as you see the B, this is how the sensor look like. The kind of grayish part here, you see highly doped silicon. So this is silicon. So my whole career has been around silicon. So that's where we started from. Then we have a thin layer of this material that is called a silicon carbide. It's also a semiconductor. And importantly, we use that silicon carbide as a source and template for graphene. So we can grow graphene directly on that silicon carbide. And the advantage is that we can control that growth very well. The graphene adheres very well to the silicon carbide, and this will have consequences that you'll see later. And so we can create very, very robust sensors, but very simple ones. So basically, the front side here, the green part on the top, there will be graphene. The graphene is in contact with the skin, and we tested it first on the forearm, then on the forehead, and then you'll see in the last paper, we put it on the back side of the head. Then the connection is actually very, very simple. We have a carbon tape in this work here, so conductive carbon tape. Really, you can't think of something simpler. Of course, we can improve that, but at the moment, this was what we used for the demonstration, and then a metal pin button, and you can see that in the A figure how they look like. So on the front, you have the graphene. Of course, you don't see the graphene, you see the silicon carbide underneath, but that's the graphene on the top. And on the bottom, you have the pin button. The pin button clearly then connects into the socket of the helmet. So let's perhaps go to the next, to figure 4. This is where we tested these sensors, and we also kind of benchmarked them with what is available at the moment in terms of dry sensors commercially. So you can see here in the B, the other sensors, commercial sensors that we use are these kind of pin sensors. This is gold pins. Why are they pins? Because in the areas where the scalp is hairy, of course, you want those pins to reach through the scalp, the hair to the scalp. Then there is another type of sensor, which is we call the foam sensor. So this is a conductive foam encased, and that also basically can create a relatively okay contact with the skin. And then our sensors are the ones on the bottom here. So you can see that, so this is the beauty of graphene. Graphene is, if you can use it and integrate it in a proper way, there's a lot of really interesting properties that you can take advantage of. As I said, one is the biocompatibility, the high conductivity, because graphene, even though it's really, really thin, can be extremely conductive. And not only, but also the fact that it's a layered material. And you'll see in a moment what I mean. So if you go to C, so the impedance with the skin is very important. Of course, that's what we're after. We really want to drive this impedance with the skin down as much as possible. So typical impedances for the wet sensors would be around perhaps 10 kilo ohms, perhaps even less. So you can see that we start pretty high up here, 400, right? Kilo ohms, so that's a lot. But interestingly enough, if you see how you can notice how after a number of sequential tests we did on the forehead, this number goes down pretty drastically. If you look at both, you see the 50 hertz and the 100 hertz. They start pretty high, one from 400 and 300 kilo ohms, and they go down to even below 100. And then they become really stable. So that really was interesting for us. And we also did a break of contact. You see there's 10 minutes of air exposure to just see what happens once it's exposed to air. Do we get back to the same type of value? And you can see that after we prime them with the contact on the skin, actually the air exposure degrades a little bit, but then we can recover quite quickly again, the same stable values. So we were really intrigued because this is really important. We really want to drive down the values of impedance as much as possible. And so we looked also, there's another aspect was, in contact with the skin, there's a lot of different things that, the skin has a lot of different components on the surface. One for sure, or clearly, would be the sweat. And if you want to use sensors in a very reliable way for soldiers, for example, that are in the field for a very, very long time, potentially under the sun, particularly if you're in Australia, you can imagine, it will sweat a lot. So what is the resilience and the reliability of these sensors in that type of environment? And you can see that in D. So in D, you see that actually when this is basically, we first soaked the sensor into saline solution, and then we tested it. And you can see that this is the beauty of graphene. When graphene is intercalated with ions, it becomes even more conductive. And it becomes, and you can see a similar trend. And this time, when you get down to the stable values during the measurement, you can get down to even 5 kilo ohms, which is extraordinary. And in this case, of course, the sensor has been soaked, but it's not like in the case of the silver chloride sensors where you have actual gel in between the sensor and the scalp. In this case, you just have like a very, very thin film of moisture, enough to drive down that impedance that quickly. So this was really, really interesting. And of course, we wanted to understand more because there's a lot of things to be understood. What happens here? What is really happening? We have some general idea, but of course there's a lot of the mechanisms that we're still figuring out. So we did a little more investigation. We did some chemical analysis. We tried to, of course, with XPS, that's in the next figure. XPS is not necessarily always the best method because, of course, sometimes when you fit those peaks, you can have some ideas, but quantification is really, really complicated. But we did see that there was a change in the type of moisture that we were absorbing at the very surface of the graphene before and after the exposure to the skin. And basically, with that information and a little bit more investigation, we found out that the hydration of the layers of graphene was really the key part here. And what happens? So graphene, if for those of you who are familiar with graphene, there's this really very, very thin, atomic thin layer made all of carbon atoms, all arranged in an hexagonal matrix. It's very conductive and it's very, when it's perfect graphene, is also very unreactive, so very low surface energy. That means usually that it's very hydrophobic. And this is what we see. So if you look at figure 6A, so where you see on the top view the contact impedance versus sequential tests, you can see that when you start off from those 400 kiloohms, if you do a contact angle measurement on that graphene, you will find the hydrophobicity, which is typical of graphene. But the interesting fact is that after a few sequential tests, when we are decreasing dramatically that contact impedance, and by the way, you don't have to pass any current in order to do that. All you need is to put the graphene in contact with the skin. You can see that the hydrophobicity becomes all of a sudden hydrophilicity. So we go down from a contact angle with water of above 70 degrees down to about 30 something degrees. So the material is becoming hydrophilic just by the fact that it's in contact with the water. Not only that, we also noticed that this effect is different depending on what we call the grain size of the graphene. So our process yields quite a small grain size. So typically we are below 100 nanometers of grains in our graphene. So what we did is we looked at another type of graphene that is produced in a completely different way and comes as a flake. That graphene would have, so that's what we call here the large grain graphene. That graphene would have like larger than 1 micron size grains, so really much bigger. And basically what happens there is that, yeah, we have a little bit of the same trend, but as you can see, that trend is much more reduced. So that reduction of contact impedance upon contact with the skin is not as flagrant, not as impressive as what we get onto our graphene with small grain sizes. So definitely we thought, okay, the grain sizes must play an important role here. And well, it's not unthinkable. The grain sizes, of course, is where you have dangling bonds, where the material is most reactive. And something must happen at the grain sizes when you put the graphene in contact with the water. So potentially what could be happening is that we are kind of functionalizing those grain boundaries with somehow with OH groups, or with some through, the mechanism, I'm sure is quite complicated and we're still looking into that. But certainly what happens in the end is that we will have a lot more OH groups all around the grain boundaries of the graphene, and those OH groups will attract like a boundary layer of water. Not only that, but when you start functionalizing, attracting and making the material hydrophilic, it is also much easier for the different layers of graphene to be intercalated. So we can intercalate that with the ions from the salts that are present in for example, in the sweat. And thanks to that, it will become even more conductive. So this principle is very important because probably it would not work as well if you had really the ideal graphene with really incredibly large grain sizes that a lot of people are working with. So this is an area that is really interesting, and we're working more with collaborators now these days to understand a little bit more the different steps and the different mechanisms that are around here. But we think that this is really one of the fundamental things that graphene brings to the table, is that not only is biocompatible, not only it is conductive, but this synergetic work with the skin and context on the skin is really what makes a difference. And it basically, I'd say, usually I say that we can reach a kind of semi-dry sensor approach by using graphene, because in fact we are intercalating with a tiny boundary layer of water, the layers of graphene, and of course that reduces a lot the capacitive component when you are in contact with the skin. Hence, the impedance will be much better, will be strongly improved, which is what we see. So basically, we can work with dry sensors in a semi-dry way, if that's that's what basically I'm trying to convey here. And that's really something that only graphene can bring to the table. Now, if we go to figure 6, this was just as a quick test, like a sanity test to understand. So what we did, we had a full helmet from our collaborator, and with those different channels, as you can see here in B, the two frontal channels here, we decided to swap them and just compare. So we used our graphene sensors flat on the frontal, on the forehead. And this is, so channel 1 and 2, this is what you see here in C, the top figure. So these are the epitaxial graphene electrodes, and that's the signal. So don't worry about the signal. This is just a test that we were doing as internal comparison. So there is not a particular meaning behind this signal. Then we swapped that with the pin electrodes that I mentioned before, the ones with the gold pin. And then we swapped that with the foam electrodes, which are the other electrodes that I showed before. So as you go from top to down, you can clearly see that you lose more and more detail in the spectrum that you're resolving from the biopotentials. And this is really important, because if you have to run a classification algorithm on the extracted biopotentials, you can understand that you are going to be much more accurate by working with the spectrum that you have on top here, rather than the one in the middle or the one on the bottom, where you have a lot less definition of the spectrum. So that is the principle. The better the contact, the lower the impedance, and of course there's a lot more. There's signal to noise and other things, but impedance is really one of the key parameters that we are after. So basically, yes, that what we found is that graphene really helps to obtain that type of situation that is not completely dry, not a completely dry sensor. And I know that some people call semi-dry something a little bit different. So semi-dry is maybe not the best definition, but basically you got the picture, is that graphene is able to create these thin boundary layers of water and reduce the impedance. So this was our very first demonstration done with these flat sensors. And this is just, to show the capabilities and have an idea of what we could do. Now, more recently then, we continued working, because I mentioned our aim was to use this as BMI, these sensors as BMI sensors. And then, of course, it becomes a little bit more complex, because, so those previous sensors, of course, for the forehead are very good. So if you're thinking of, looking at cognitive states, monitoring thinking processes and that type of thing, those sensors already work very well, those flat sensors of the first paper. However, if you're going towards BMIs, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And so you can go now to the second paper, which is the most recent one, just came out earlier this year, 2023. And this is where we actually show the whole demonstration into the BMI. And this was extremely exciting because, yeah, we were really able to see the result of what we were doing, which was, it doesn't happen often in a whole career sometimes. So I was personally very, very excited. And of course, all the members of my group were extremely happy about what we could do together with our collaborators. So what's the idea here? I will jump all of the introduction, but yeah, maybe. So we can start from the abstract, the pictorial abstract, sorry, the figure. So BMIs, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept. I'm sure if there are some neuroscientists, you're very familiar, and if there's people that are experts of other areas may not know necessarily how that works, but so I might have to do a very, very quick introduction. So BMI is based on wearables, so EEG. They basically use the EEG signal, which is, as I said, is produced by the collective oscillations of neurons, and we're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of neurons, so really big population. And the way it works is that we do not read thoughts, and I always said that because sometimes I get some people commenting that they're really scared about knowing that we can read thoughts, but we can't. So we're very safe. We're very, down the road, potentially we might at some stage get there, but at the moment we are absolutely very far from that. So this is a process that happens according to a certain protocol, and the person has to be totally willing to participate in this BMI system, because the user has to make a conscious choice that has to be transmitted to the robotic platform. So how does it work? Is if you see this the picture on the abstract, and there is a bigger one later on if you want to see that look at that one. So there is a helmet, and there is a HoloLens, a visor on the front that the user has as well. The user is fed a visual clue, because we are using it as SVP, so steady state visually evoked potential. So it means this BMI system has to use a clue. Clue could be visual, could be also auditory, could be different things. We chose to go with a visual one. So that's why we have a HoloLens. Now, because it's visual, we have to collect the signals in correspondence to the visual cortex. And now the visual cortex is on the back of the head. And this is where the complication comes, because it is quite relatively straightforward to collect signals from the forehead, because the forehead is flat, relatively flat, is free of hair and such. But when you have to go on the back of the skull, that's a different situation, because you have hair, and the skull itself is it has curvatures, sometimes really sharp curvatures as well. So you can understand that if you have a flat 1x1 sort of rigid sensor, that's not going to work very well. So we needed to do something about it. And that something was basically introduce the macro patterning. So making this almost like a 3D sort of, well, you've seen the pins before, those are millimeter-sized pins. In this case, we do micron-sized pins. Of course, we still need to cover that with graphene, because graphene is our electrode. So how do we do that? And this is very, straightforward, based on our platform, but also based on microfabrication capabilities that are available to researchers. So what we do is we start with silicon carbide on silicon. Remember, the silicon carbide is basically what we use to make graphene. We pattern the silicon carbide, and we pattern, for example, as pillars or different shapes. the shapes can be, so if you, sorry, I'm looking at figure number 1 now at the moment, if you can go there, of the second paper. So you do lithography, micron-size lithography, and you can, you can really have an idea. You could do many different types of shapes, different densities, different sizes. There's a whole range of things you can look at, but that's how we do it. Let's suppose we do pillars. So you go down, the pillars are formed, and then after lithography, we do what is called the etching, so selective removal of the material. And so we form these pillars. These pillars are, in this case, they are kind of 10 microns thick and a few microns wide. That's more or less the sizes that we'll be using here. And these pillars are made mostly of silicon, but then the tip is made of silicon carbide. And that's the important thing, because the silicon carbide, then the surface of the silicon carbide, we can transform that into graphene. And so in the end, you see the second last schematic, we have these pins that have like a tip covered by graphene. And those are our electrodes. And then this is how, in the end, you see the picture, how they look top down from a simple microscope. So these are micron-sized features. They can be made also thicker, of course, if you want. That was just our first preliminary attempt. And we made different sizes and different shapes and different, this was our first approach. We really wanted to understand a little bit more how we could use those. So if you go to perhaps this figure 2, no, let's go to the next one. Let's go to figure, this one, the figure 3. Figure 3 was where we wanted to basically compare the different shapes and designs that we came up with. And the very interesting thing is that, whereas you see in the figure 3D, this is the test on the skin, on the forehead, sorry. So on the forehead, that flat area of the scalp. And usually this corresponds, so the better impedance, the lower, so the more, how can I say, the larger the area covered by graphene, the lower the impedance. And this is understandable because the graphene is the part that is really conductive, that makes good contact with the skin, and of course it should have the best impedance, right? Best meaning the lowest. And this is how it goes. However, when we start looking at other impedances on the occipital region of the scalp. And by the way, I need to put a disclaimer here. Our user that you see also in the picture had an almost shaved head. So it had hair, but the hair was just 5 millimeter long. So very, very short hair. So you can see from the table number 1. So if you go up a little bit from the figure 3, you see table number 1. And again, you can see you have here for the different designs, graphene sensors designs area. That one, of course, on the top is the full area, so 1 centimeter square, and then the other ones have less and less graphene. And as I said before, you see the column here on skin impedance on the forehead. The total the largest the total area and the lowest is the impedance. But when you make the contact on the occipital area of the head, that is no longer true. Actually, the flat graphene sensors that have the largest area of graphene have one of the highest impedances. And that's where the trick comes, is because that region is really different. And because of the curvature of the skull, a flat sensor would not work as well. And that's where we're still working to refine that more and more. But we found that, for example, those that design that had like an hexagonal shape, which is in figure 2A, so the number I, just the first one, those were some that was the design that really gave us the best compromise between the total area of the graphene and enough, space in between to accommodate for that very short hair and the contact with the skin. So that worked the best for us. And those were the ones that we used for the full demonstration. So, and then we go to figure 4. So we don't have a, yet, but we'll develop that in the second part of this project. We don't have yet a very nice helmet for this purpose. So at the moment, all we could do is we use a swimming cap, as you can see on figure 4. And we use that to host basically our sensors, and the sensor you can see the non-B. So that part is a part in contact with the skin. And now the development of the helmet will be really, really important, because at the moment, most helmets that are available for this type of work are helmets that are using very thick sensors, and like the ones with the pins and such. And those helmets, of course, don't work very well with these ones. These ones are extremely thin. And very importantly, and that we got also as a feedback from our users in the Army, the users of the Army, the surgeons that we were working with, they use both the pin sensors as well as these micro pattern sensors. And they told us that after, even 5-10 minutes of using that helmet with the pin sensors, they would start having almost a migraine, because unfortunately those pins really push into the scalp, because they have to maintain a good contact throughout. So that's the reason. Contact is really not having any air gap in between the sensors and the skin is absolutely key. Now, what we can do with these micropattern sensors is also that we can push them as much as we do with the other pin, the commercial pin sensors, but that does not result in having a headache, because these are micro sort of, so the distribution of the stress and the whole, load on the sensor is completely different. You won't get these things almost, pushing through your skull like you get in the case of the pin sensors. So basically, also from a user perspective, these sensors you can keep them for a longer time without, well, first of all, they don't degrade in a highly saline solution, but they're also more comfortable. However, we will have to develop a much better and much more adequate sort of helmet that goes with that. Figure 5 shows basically how we applied this. This is in the lab. We didn't, so in this paper was focused on what we did in the lab, not necessarily what we did outside in the together with the Army. But this is basically the platform that we were using here is a robotic dog from Ghost Robotic from Boston that we had on loan from them. And so we developed the interfaces with that robotic dog. And basically the sensors are, if you look at figure 5G, the sensors are, you can see the blue swimming cap. Basically, you can almost see that underneath the helmet. This helmet, in fact, is only used in this case to push those sensors against the skull. It's just to apply pressure. The actual sensors are embedded in that swimming cap that you saw before. As I said, putting pressure, making sure that there is no air gap is absolutely essential. And this is why you really need the spikes and this micro patterning on the back of the head. Now, how does this work? SSVP works, it's one of the paradigms that you can use with least training. Because in fact, what happens, you see this in C, you see these 6 rectangle or squares, basically. These squares, each of them represents one command that the user can transmit to the robotic platform. For example, go forward, stop, go left, go right, different things, arranged specific commands. Now, so how does the user choose? The user gazes at one specific command. And basically, each of these these squares flicker, but they flicker slightly different frequency. And this is the very important point, because basically the discrimination between those frequencies is exactly what we pick up here on the back from the sensors on the back of the head. So basically that frequency is picked up and it's harmonics. And then of course the classification, the decoder will run the algorithm on the spectrum, identify the frequency, do some form of redundant error check, and then transform that, do classification and transform that into decode basically the intent and transform it into a command that is wirelessly transmitted to the robotic platform. This is basically how it works. Why is this the least type of training possible? Is because, in fact, just the action of the user in gazing onto one of these different squares gives an immediate signal through the visual cortex. And there is no further processing that the person has to do, in fact. It just has to gaze onto one of the chosen command. And of course, that's important because, of course, if you want to use this system for different people and you don't want to necessarily train all the people all the time, taking a lot of training can take a lot of time. Personal training is, it's in the combat, you don't necessarily want to do that. So really, we decided to go for that type of paradigm. But of course, there's different paradigms, and different paradigms serve different purposes. So basically, at the end of the story here, and approaching the end, is that when we used the graphene sensors, exactly in the way that, so we had here 8 graphene sensor channels on the back of the head. Why did we put 8? Well, we could put less, we could put more. In fact, 8 gave us a sort of better, signal in terms of better accuracy as well. In principle, you could do even just with 1, but you need some redundancy in order to be able. Not all channels work well all the time. So basically, the need of multiple channels is because of the need for redundancy, which in turn, of course, improves also the accuracy. And so with a combination of our sensors and the algorithms developed by CT, our collaborators, we were able to obtain an accuracy of about 95% in this preliminary study, which is really using this very rudimental sort of helmet design. These are the first designs, but there's still a lot of things that we can do to optimize those designs and such. So we were extremely happy. We had really a demonstration. We had some videos where we show our colleague Daniel here moving the robotic platform just with his thought, which was really fantastic to see. Of course, when he puts on the silver chloride sensors, he gets 100% accuracy. But remember that what we are trying to do is to make those sensors as good as possible, as close as possible to the silver chloride, so that we are able to make all the system really portable. I think I talked a lot. So, Katerina, maybe I should stop here and give the chance to people to ask questions, make comments, and whatever they feel like.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really wonderful how you explained the design and the comparison of the different systems, what the reasoning, and then also then the really amazing result of like 95% accuracy is really very impressive. And so yeah, let's start with some questions. If people want to come up to the stage, feel free to come. I know Eric and Dr. Shah are here already, and or actually Eric, I invited you to speak, Eric, so yeah, now it worked. Perfect. So let me hand over the microphone to Dr. Shah and Eric because I know we have 5 minutes left, and then in the end, if I have time, I'll ask a question. Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Dr.
Hey, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. That was very informative. My question from you, it's about the HVG sensors and which other areas of the brain it can have a use. For example, when we want to consider the auditory area, or for example, language centers. Can we use this HVEG and with the considering of the long-term reliability also, as well as the interference and noises?
Thanks for your question. So I do hope so. I do hope so. We did not test in those areas, of course, because we didn't have the reason for doing that so far. But what I expect is that probably different areas will require a little bit more of fine tuning in terms also of what type of designs fit best with the area as well. As I showed before, there's a big difference between what we can use in the forehead and what we can use with the back. But I should hope so, yes, that there should be a possibility to adapt those sensors also to other areas like auditory areas and such. And we would be very, very happy to collaborate with colleagues that are interested in that type of application.
And as long as that was an invasive BMI, if I right, when you're talking about the BMI, so you think that if we can use it in those areas, how the BMI it might change?
So these ones, so we are only working with wearables, of course. So we can only, place the sensors in areas, in correspondence with the area of the cortex that we're focusing on. You mean with invasive sensors? We cannot clearly, as I said before, the wearables, EEG-based sensors and implantable sensors are doing things that are pretty complementary. So ECOG as well, like the sensor that are placed directly on the cortex, they have a much better signal. Like the signals that we are reading out are in the order of microvolts, so really tiny. Of course, if you have ECOG, intercortical sort of sensors that sit on the cortex, they have much higher sort of signal and much better temporal and spatial resolution. So, of course, there's always that, it always depends on the granularity and the precision of the response you're looking for. So there will be always things that we cannot do from the outside, but I think as we improve the type of sensors, we can certainly push some boundaries.
Thank you so much for your responses.
See.
Yeah, thank you. Eric, did you have a question?
My question was more about the tuning of the surface. Was there any tuning involved to perhaps reduce the reflections from the surface itself? I know when our team has looked at that, that's been kind of annoying, but the interesting thing is that some antennas, some shapes or metamaterials, in some instances lend themselves to canceling out some of those reflections, so we found that to be useful. Did you, if by chance you explored that, or if you had a comment about that? Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. This is an interesting point. To be honest, at the moment we haven't looked at that yet. There could be something that we could look into and see if we can perhaps improve even more. But no, I'd like to hear more about that. If there's any information
I can give you more information. So using a vector network analyzer, you can measure the impedance of those kinds of measurements. So you have 4 kinds of measurements. You have the measurement of the cable from the output of the cable to where your sensor is, and then another cable on the other side,
Oh,
kind of
okay, yeah,
signing that
yeah,
off, right?
to
So,
the
so
system.
uh,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
device.
yeah. I understand it's a system level sort of, yeah. I think, as I said, there's probably a lot more we can do in that area. At the moment, we have not really optimized any of that, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah,
So,
yeah. I'll pass on some information to Katerina, because it does improve the signal quality significantly if you're able to remove some of those properties or aspects of the signal. Yeah, and in general, the military uses this in their sensors, so it's quite a common technique if you take a closer look. But yeah.
oh, fantastic! Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. And Hari Kumar, did you have a question? We have actually, I have to ask you, Francesca, if you have time for one more question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, go. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Hari Kumar. Could you hear me? Did I press accidentally on mute on Clubhouse? Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you.
So yeah, so do you see any difference in sensitivity for higher frequencies comparing the conventional EEG system? So does this graphene-based system, do they show any higher sensitivity for high frequency of electric potential differences?
So you mean are you talking about if there is any distortion, or do I understand correctly what you mean?
So the skull act as a low pass filter for the signal. That's like the difference between
Yeah.
ECOG and EEG is that skull act as a low pass filter. So that's one thing about EEG. It cannot have high spatial frequency. In the sense, that's the reason the spatial frequency of the EEG system itself is very low. That's the reason why we keep EEG sensors very far apart, because keeping them very close together doesn't give you much uh, better results, because the spatial frequency itself is very low. But there
Yes.
may be, even though skull is a low pass filter, there may be some higher frequencies that is coming out of skull, but which it might have a very less amplitude. So these graphene sensors, having their own high conductivity index, are they sensitive to a bit higher frequencies of the signal comparing the conventional electrodes?
Look, we focus so far. We focus just on the the lower end of frequencies. But if anything, graphene is definitely expected to. I mean, is one of the materials that is expected to behave really well at high frequency.
Yeah.
Graphene itself. Then, of course,
Yeah.
you have the substrate that could potentially introduce some problems, because the silicon, it's depending on the frequency you're talking about, of course. What high frequencies for you is what range?
I mean, what will be the maximum frequency that we can detect in the conventional ones? And it will be on the gamma range, right?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. As I said, at the moment, it's not something we really looked into.
Okay.
But, what high frequency? I mean, but as I said, graphene would not. Well, we're even using graphene at terahertz frequencies. So graphene, in terms of frequencies, is definitely not going to be the bottleneck at all. If
Yeah.
anything, there could be a little bit more distortion from the silicon,
Yeah.
depending on what frequencies we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. So yeah. So that's the question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. And the one question I had was, if you considering like a multimodal brain or sensory information, like, and if you are planning also to have like feedback information for maybe improve. I mean, it's already 90%, 95% accuracy, but maybe for more complex movements in like a real world
Oh,
behavior, if like feedback information on the skin or electric information, if you're planning to do
sure,
that. Yeah.
sure. No, Katharina, that's a very good point. In fact, the accuracy right now, we were very happy because this is honestly is our preliminary test. There's a lot more we need to improve on, as I said before. And also the accuracy was based on these 6 commands, so it's not a huge amount of commands, and we have a certain latency. What we like to do is to reduce that latency as much as possible and increase the amount of commands. So it's going to be quite a challenge, of course. So everything we can improve, we will certainly do. And in terms of multifunctionalities, absolutely, this is something that's definitely we would like to explore. Potentially also, if necessary, some possibility for stimulation, some possibility of also integrating with some optical systems as well. We're working on metasurfaces based on graphene and silicon carbide. That has not, that part of the story hasn't come up into the sensors at all at the moment, but certainly in the future, that's where we're going. So that's why we're using silicon basically, is because although it's rigid, it really gives a lot more capabilities in terms of combining different functionalities.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm very excited to read in the future your work that will come out of your lab, because it's such an interesting field and evolving quite fast with, I guess, all the technology and machine learning you can use to analyze also all the data. So thank you so much for coming. I hope we are still okay. I know we went a little bit over the time, and it was really a great pleasure and honor to have you here. And I hope we'll hear you maybe one day in the future again and you enjoyed it a little bit. Thank you.
That would be nice. Katharina, thanks a lot. And thanks a lot to everyone who cannot meet in person, but thanks for listening to me.
Oh, thank you. It was a great talk.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Francesca. Bye. Have a good evening. Bye. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming, asking questions. We'll have our next room on Wednesday, the science news updates, and then on Thursday, Professor Mike Levin. He will come back. For people who don't know him, he's the researcher that developed these xenobots and other like organic bots and a lot of more new technology, and who also releases work about new concept of a mind, that we kind of have to change that because the mixture of minds will vary in the future a lot. We will be maybe 90% human, 10% technology, or even more mixtures. So the concept of mind will also be discussed. Will be usually he's coming back the 4th time if you want to listen to replays from previous rooms before. But it will be a really interesting discussion. We will get updates, what's going on in his lab, and the latest publications. He has a very fast pace getting publications out. So, and they're always really interesting. So, anyways, thank you so much, everyone. I had to stream through my account today, but you can check out the profile of our speaker from today in the chat. I shared the profile and the lab website. And yeah, I hope to hear you all again soon. Thank you. Close the room in 3, 2, 1. Bye, everyone. Thank you.